You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hello again, welcome back to the podcast, episode 288 today. Adrian hosting, Paul Adams joining me today. Paul's our head of new product development, and today the topic is phase gate reviews.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I'm sort of, so good to be back again. 288. I can't remember the last time I was on, but it feels a long time ago. But
not that long.
Good to be back. Yeah, I know. So
we get you. We rope you in periodically.
Correct. Yeah, and happy to be here. So today I want to let's talk about sort of phase gates and why they're important and where they should be used, etc., etc. So this is a pretty good topic for project management in general, and it's one that can be very, very useful for monitoring and making sure no mistakes are pushed forward into the expensive stages of any project, really. It's going to be an interesting discussion.
And listeners that are regulars to the podcast have heard us speak before about the complexity of manufacturing project, specifically when you're developing a product and then bringing it to market, right? Because the whole process includes a myriad of different activities that you need to get right to reduce risks and actually end up with a successful project, i.e. getting the product onto the market on time, on budget, with the required quality and reliability. I mean, the list is endless. And so when you're organizing quite a complex project like this is where phase gate reviews are really going to come into their own for helping to, as you've said, stop issues from going on into the next phase of your project. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, pretty much sort of nailed it on that last statement there, Adrian. It's there as a risk assessment, amongst other things. But anyways, to start with, let's work out what a phase gate or a stage gate is, and in simple terms, this is what we say is a pass-through gate or a process that should be implemented throughout the new product introduction or NPI process. Now, generally, there are 4 or 5, 6 different stages or phases of a new product introduction process, and that's broken down into the manageable chunks of a project, let's say. So if we're looking at the start of a project, if you're starting off, you start off with the specification stage, okay, which is the standard area where every project will start off. Okay, what am I looking for? What type of things do I want the product to do? If you're building a racing car, there's something different to a mobile phone case, for example. But each, regardless of how detailed that project is, it needs some sort of specification. Take the simple phone case. What's the material going to be made of? What's the purpose of this? Is it purely to protect the phone? Is it to look nice? Is it to be bomb-proof? So all of this is part of the specification. Now, when you move into the next phase or stage of the process, there has to be some sort of checklist or some sort of conscious review with respect to, have I completed this stage before I move into the next stage? So I'm just going to stick with the simple, very, very simple phone case for the moment. And we're going to move on to more complex projects later on. Don't worry. But going from this, from the specification stage, let's say, into the next stage, which would be feasibility in a standard NPI process. The checklist may be, do you have the material specified? Yes or no? Do you have the correct sizes specified? Yes or no? And if any of these is no, then you can't move to the next phase. So therefore, this stage gate or phase gate process is there to ensure that you have completed the previous phase before you move into the next phase. Now, some
Mm.
people refer to these phase gates or stage gates as traffic light systems,
Mm.
which is basically, red, no, you still got to stop because you haven't completed everything. You are amber. Well, actually, you can move forward, but at risk because you still got some outstanding issues from the previous phase, but they're not that serious and they can catch up. Or green, yep, wow, we've done a really good job here. Let's move straight forward. So that phase gate, I'm using a very, very simple phone case as an example, is making sure that we've ticked all of the specifications or whatever phase you're in, ensure everything's correct and in place. In other words, you reviewed every part, risk, cost, budget before you move it to the next stage. Yeah, and each
Mm.
stage has its own list, which again we're going to look at in a minute. So
Mm.
basically, that's what the stage gate or phase gate or the traffic light system, whatever you want to call it, is all about.
Right. That makes a lot of sense to me. Of course, if you are just plowing forward and you're not necessarily reaching your specifications, well, you're going to end up with a product that's out of spec. Like, has the case used the right type of plastic, for example? Oh, we didn't check that. And well, so you've just manufactured completely the wrong product, basically. That's the worst case, right? So it makes perfect sense what you're talking about. That example I just gave, using a wrong material, I mean, that's one potential issue. There are a number of reasons why that you would want to use phase gates specifically, and you can tell us a bit about that, right?
Well, yeah, yeah. If you're not using phase gates, in other words, you've got a straight runway from A to Z, or
Mm.
from one up to phase six into mass production. Right, so you got no stops. You just got a straight runway. Let's call it. It's a very, very difficult, especially if you've got a complex project. It's really complex, and it's very, very difficult to manage every single part of that process unless you've broken it, one, down into phases, and two, you're
Mm.
controlling each of those phases. Okay, so let's have a look at the differences, really, and I really want to focus on the stage gate process as opposed to anything else. And as we're moving through the MPI process, each of these stage gates has a different set of criteria as you move forward and through them. And the emphasis is there, move through the gate in order to move to the next phase. Okay. And this is all about improving decision making on each of the phases or each of the parts of the phase that need to be completed in order for you to move forward into the next phase. Okay, so we've got that decision making process being part of the phase gate itself. There's also, this is a really important one, accountability. Each member of the core team should be accountable for delivering certain aspects. And we're going to come on to that shortly with respect to what is required in a phase gate. But for now, we really need to be looking at accountability. So, everybody on the core team needs to play their part. We can't actually go through the phase gate if there's nobody from quality, for example, on the core team, or the quality person saying, well, I forgot to do all my work, but don't worry about it, I'll catch up. That's not good enough.
Mm.
Everyone needs to be accountable for their role within the core team and the phase gate process itself. Another one that allows us to have a look at this and why it really matters as we're moving through the process is the audit trail, okay, and the transparency and making sure that everything that is on the checklist, let's say, is being delivered and it's traceable. Okay, so if you're looking back from an audit point of view in 6 months' time, a year's time, 2 years' time, Is the paperwork in place? Well, yes, it is, because we went through that phase gate in order to move to the next phase. So we know everything's there, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to move forward and through the gate into the next phase. Okay, so that's one good thing. Another thing, we often see this when we're working on external projects for customers,
Mm.
is a lot of the customers do have sponsors or investors or angel investors, whatever the case may be, and they are they have the responsibility to report back to their investor. Okay, if the process is being followed, and the company, yeah, in this case, I'll say that we are working with, they have to report back to their investors. If they can show that the phase gate was approved and we got the green light in order to move forward into the next phase, in other words, unlocking the next sort of cash flow in order to go into making prototypes or tooling or whatever the case may be, wherever phase they're in, you need to be able to show that everything's under control. And having that phase gate or a stage gate in process with a very tight and well controlled documentation allows the customer to go back to the investor and say, look, this is a really neat, tied up package. We've achieved everything that we've done so far. Everything's good. Well, we've got the green light from the team. Can I have the next round of funding? With that in place, right, there shouldn't be any reason, if everything's pre-agreed, that the funds wouldn't be unlocked. So that's another important aspect, that having that tight control with the phases through each of the stages of the MPI process helps those individuals or the companies, unlock the very much required funding in some cases.
Mm.
So, which is really good. And another important one is uh, looking at all of the risks. Now, a big part of the stage gate is risk management. On the early stages, if you miss the fact that, go back to the phone case again, if you miss the fact that actually I wanted carbon fiber because it just really looks good, and I don't like the feel of silicone phone cases, is that a showstopper? Well, maybe not, maybe not. But when we're talking about, some of the bigger, larger projects, and you misspecify the material as big as that, then it could well be a showstopper. So we're looking at risks throughout the whole process. At each of these stage gates or each of these traffic light systems between the phases is really important that we're doing our due diligence on risk and risk management.
Mm.
Okay, that's basically why phase gates matters and what they're all about.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of benefit there I can see. Now, practically speaking, for anyone listening, I'm sure I'm nodding my head along to what you're saying. This makes a lot of sense. But practically speaking, I think it's important to break down how we would actually implement phase gates into the process in order to understand how they really work. Because it's all very well agreeing, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But one of the reasons why, businesses come to us, for example, to support their new product development and manufacturing project is because they don't have the bandwidth or maybe the experience to actually implement something like this themselves, right? And they're looking for expertise. So for anyone who isn't sure, how do we implement it?
Yeah, that's a good point, Adrian. Yeah, we're talking about, well, yeah, they're really important and all the rest of it, but how would you actually set one up? Well, it's broken down into, well, let me break it down into a number of logical steps.
Hmm.
To start with, let's establish who is in the core team. Now, when I'm talking about core teams, I generally use that terminology when I'm talking about project management or the management of a project has a core team. Now, the core team would involve the project manager. It would have our QPM or quality project manager. It would have our production quality manager. It would have someone from, purchasing, supply chain management. So that would be the core team for the project. Let me make it clear, right? That is not what we're talking about here when we're talking about the phase gate core team. So I should stop using the terminology core team. Let's call it the phase gate team. Okay.
Hmm.
So who should be in the phase gate team, we're talking about stakeholders. We're talking about independent people that are not necessarily involved with the project itself, that are there to act as, for lack of a better term, the policeman, okay, between the phases. And I think it's really important here that we actually talk about that you should have potentially, we're talking about the CEO of the company if we're talking about a contract manufacturer. In our case, sometimes that would happen, sometimes it wouldn't. CEO is always super, super busy and so running the business and all the rest of it. However, you would have some of the senior management on the phase gate team. So you would have the quality manager, you would have the engineering manager, you would have the production manager, and some of these other independent people you could call upon that are not related to the project itself necessarily. However, you could have one or two key members of the team in order to explain what the product is and obviously to present the paperwork or the information and the details that are required during the review at each of the phases. So you can imagine if all of the phase team have no idea what the project is and purely go through a checklist with respect to, is this document completed and present? Yes, it is. Tick the box. Without actually understanding what's on or in or the details and the fine print of that document can be a little bit dangerous.
Mm.
So it's really a cross-functional team with higher or senior management where possible, but with a few key and selected members from the project. Some of those could be the core team. Let's go back to the core team terminology. Some of those may not be. Okay, so it's that blend of individuals that have, and again, this is really, very important, the authority to say, no, stop, we cannot move forward. In some cases, and in most cases, right, this should include the customer. Okay, because a key component of the review is to cross-examine everything. And that means budget and resources.
Mm.
Okay. So in our case, if we are looking at taking on a project, moving it from one phase to the next, we would have to look internally with respect to, do we have the bandwidth to take something on and move it into the next phase? In other words, do we have the skill set within the team in order to move it from one phase to the next? Generally, we can answer that is yes, we do. We have to turn that around and face that to the customer and say, dear Mr. Customer, do you have the funds in order to take the project where it is now and complete, not just move it into the next phase, but to complete the next phase? Now, this is where I was talking earlier, they may have to go back to their investor, whoever that may be, angel investor, bank, or whatever the case may be, and say, as long as this package that we're reviewing now is all correct and current, I can present that information and I'm sure that we'll get the funds to move on because it's been prearranged as long as we've met the criteria for this previous phase.
Mm.
Okay. They may say, well, actually, we're self-funded and I'm a millionaire and it's not a multi-millionaire and it's not a problem. Yes, I can release the funds. We can move on straight away. However, there are occasions where the customer is trying to run on a budget and, you know, it's that they haven't got the budget to move into the next phase. Yeah. So at that point, we need to sit down and review where we are and discuss the situation on a case by case study. Okay.
Mm.
So that's really, really important to understand who is in the phase team. Okay. Now, when it comes to sort of planning the meeting, everything needs to be prearranged. You can't just like, tomorrow, guys, let's have a quick review, see where we are, because we'll grab a phase gate and review tomorrow. That's somewhat unfair on everybody. So this needs to be planned well in advance, such that all of the key members of the team can actually get all of the paperwork ready and present to the phase team or the phase gate team all of their pre prepared documents and present everything sort of correctly. So we need to align the state of the project with respect to when that phase gate meeting is planned.
Mm.
So that's a good one. The next one is documents. This is, and again, super important. I'm not going to spend too long on this one, but you can imagine, right? Each phase has its different set of criteria and set of documents that are required to be presented to the phase gate team. Really, really important ones are quality control documentation, design specifications, and certification requirements, depending on where in the process you are within the MPI process. Okay. But all of this is really important. Test plans, test results. Again, depending on what part of the MPI process you are, you may not have any test results yet, but you need to have a test plan in place if you're moving forward into that next phase that requires that. So it's very important that you understand the documentation that is required through each of these stages as you move forward through the MPI process. Once everything's done, there's going to be a decision. And this is where the traffic light scenario comes in, which I've heard a lot of people refer to this process as the traffic light system. And well, like I was saying before, we could have three scenarios. We could have a red stop because you haven't got one of the documents in place or it's missing a lot of information and the decision just cannot be made until that is updated or the evidence is provided correctly. Or it may be the case that there's nobody's got any budget in order to move forward. Whatever the case may be, you've got a red light. That means that it's not necessarily a hard stop and the project's dead. It means that we can't actually move forward into the next phase until a corrective action has been implemented and put forward and can reschedule the phase meeting again. But the next time round, everything needs to be correct such that you can move forward. And this is where it's really, really important on complex projects, Adrian, that we can't just blend into one phase after another. And I've seen this time and time again in the past where
Mm.
there's no phase gates in place, right? And the project does blend in and things got forgotten. And once they're forgotten, that's it. They're done and dead and forgotten. And that could mean, right, a super, super expensive risk down the road. And I think that's what we talked about very, very first of all. So anyway, once you've got your traffic light system in place, the amber is really, you can move forward, but don't forget to get that test plan in place before you actually get to your prototypes or whatever the case may be. So that's moving forward with the caveat that you need to follow on with some actions. And your green light is clear. Well done, boys and girls. Done a brilliant job here. Let's move straight forward. No delays. Let's keep moving. Then, because this is all auditable and traceable, there obviously needs to be minutes and a final recording and sort of reported with the sort of the final recommendations from the team, so the phase gate team. So that is basically how you structure the phase gate and how that should work. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it does. Beware of the blending because at that point, you're at risk of the whole, oh, it's more or less okay. And then you're going in sort of half cocked into the next phase where, in fact, it's not okay. And I guess, I guess you can kind of outline this if you can give us maybe an example, because you were talking, you'll go through a bit more of a complex product at the top of this, right? So can we talk a little bit more about a complex products? Some listeners, maybe they are creating something relatively straightforward like a phone case, which is a fairly simple product, more than
True.
likely. But more complex products, such as that we often help develop and manufacture electromechanical products, something with a motor inside or something like that. This is where this kind of thing's really going to come into its own. And especially you mentioned the cost of mistakes. Well, as you go through that new product introduction process, you're going to hit big milestones like tooling, for example, where mistakes around there, that's going to get really expensive. But I mean, you'll be better off to go through this than me. So yeah, let's give that a whirl.
Yeah, yeah. So instead of sort of crossing any lines from an IP point of view, let me sort of
Sure.
cast my mind back to a sort of number of projects that I was working X amount of years ago. let's say. um, so yeah, I can actually, it's not a hypothetical sort of case study, it's an
Hmm.
actual case study where I was working on sort of products. This was back when I was in the UK, Adrian, a long
Mm.
time ago. So, which I haven't lived in the UK for 20 years. But anyway, there you go. So let me give you the background of the product. This is a fractional horsepower motor and gearbox. Okay. And this is used on, I'll change the product around so everybody understands it. It's a stair lift. Okay.
Okay.
The stair lift where so you can't actually walk upstairs, but you're still living in a two-story bedroom,
Mhm.
sorry, house. So you fit the stair lift in, and you can sit on this, and this will like basically take you up the stairs as you're sitting there on a
Mm.
rail, reach the upper levels of your house.
Yep.
Okay, so the product that we were making at the time was not the stair lift itself, but it was the motor and the gearbox that drove the seat up the up the stairs,
Hmm.
basically. So developing this product from scratch. Okay, so we thought, right, we've got a really, really tight deadline of sort of 10 months to get this done. Now, this wasn't the first rodeo. You know, we've been, the product came out of a manufacturing plant that done motors and gearboxes. That's
Mm.
all they done. So it was just an adaptation of what was already known. So the confidence was there that we could actually do this really, really quickly. Okay. And we could skip some steps, let's say, or blend the process from A to Z. In other words, from phase one, sort of skip phase one because we know what we're doing type of attitude and all the way through. So we were going through the planning stage and say, okay, we've got a new opportunity. Yeah, someone come knock on our door and say, this is the product. It's a stair lift. We need the motor and gearbox in order to drive the weight, etc. Blah blah blah. The speed. So we got all of the specifications down. We've got them nailed. So we know exactly what we're doing here. Planned everything out. All of the CAD drawings done. Straight into the prototype stage. We really skipped a stage here with respect to the feasibility because we'd been doing motors and gearboxes and that combined motor and gearbox for a long time.
Hmm.
I mean, a long time. So it was somewhat of a complacent move in order to skip that. There was no phase gate. Okay. There was no phase gate whatsoever. And there was no real review of the design as it stood. So the feasibility was skipped and we went straight into prototyping and we were pulling designs from previous products and making minor modifications. And in some cases, like the interface between the new gearbox and a current motor, for example, and the offset and how it fitted into the actual product itself. So that was blended. The first three phases were absolutely 100% blended in. There was no phase gate whatsoever. Come to the prototyping stage, everyone was very, very confident that the product would work. And we had a dummy stair lift as a test rig in the facility itself. And we instead of putting people on the seat, we put weights on the seat, and up it
Mm.
goes, and it goes up and down, up and down, up and down a couple of times, and it's like all the way back down to the bottom. We think, oh, what happened there? It failed, basically. So the sort of the prototype failed. So we took the sort of gearbox apart, and at this stage we were using Delrin, which is a nylon, as a brand, as a nylon. We're using that for the gears.
Okay.
Okay. And in the gearbox were nylon gears. One, because they're durable, generally durable. Two, reduces the noise. Okay, so we've done this before. And because we'd done it before, we were very, very complacent and we skipped over a lot of what we now know as a very valuable tool, as in this stage gate. Okay. We then reverted back to like after having been shocked with this sort of failure where everybody was like, yeah, we're going to be in market soon and we're going to be selling like loads of these because the customers come to us. It's like fantastic orders to
Mm.
like, oh, blimey, what happened there? So instead of going straight into tooling, and the tooling in this case was die casting, not injection molding, but the gears were injection molded. So we had to go back, okay? In order for us to move forward, we had to come back almost to the start and say, okay, then we made a massive mistake here. Now, let's follow our MPI process. We are going to introduce phase gates, okay, and we're going to do this thing properly. The result was we lost the contract, okay, because we're trying to blend the process, and we skipped the parts because we were very complacent, because we've been doing motors and gearboxes for the company had been around for 20, 30 years, a long, long time. So, but it was a good job that we didn't actually get into the tooling at stage. We were just in a prototype. Okay. So we were sand casting as opposed to high pressure die casting. So we still had to do some investment in the tooling stage, but in order to save money up front, in other words, blend and go fast, we lost a lot of money. Okay. We lost the whole contract. Okay. And I don't know how much that contract would have been. Hundreds of thousands, if not sort of millions of pound, UK pounds back in the day when I was back there. So, that was a very much a worst case scenario case study. Now, skipping forward a couple of years, I'll give you one more case study quickly. So I know we don't want to overrun too much. I was working for an American company. I won't say any names, but they had a UK headquarters, and they had processes that were polished beyond belief. And they had phase gates, and this is my first true introduction, which is I left the motor guys, went to work with the American guys, and this was my first real eye opener with respect to, this is how phase gates are supposed to be used. And they had a very polished system with respect to you could not move between any phase unless you must have had 20 people reviewing each and every single documentation that you had to put in front of them and present, stand up, give it this is, hi, my name's Paul, I'm responsible for XYZ, and this is my part of the project, and this is what I'm presenting to you. It was really, really probably a little bit over the top for the majority of the companies out there that are contract manufacturers. However, we managed to get a product. This product must have had 1,500 components in it. And this was a mailing device. Okay. We got that from scratch to market in, I think it was under 18 months. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it was like a record for the company. The speed to market was a record for the company. And that was very, very impressive. So blending and going fast equals potential failure. Okay. Going slow, in other words, you've got to go through this process every time you move from one phase to another, allowed us, believe it or not, to go really, really quickly to market. Because everything was checked before you could move on. In other words, there was no risk. All of the budgets were looked at. All of the resources were made sure they're in place before we go into the next stage. Now, another key thing here, just before I finish, Adrian, is always look back and always look forward. Okay, and I think this is a key thing when you're doing your phase gate reviews. Say if you're in just finish the prototype stage and you want to go into the tooling. Okay, so that's a pretty critical phase that you need to make sure you get right.
Yep.
Any issues you're making in tooling, as you said, can be very expensive. So this is where you need to look back before you look forward. In other words, during the prototype stage, right, did we achieve our goals set from the previous stage gate when we were looking forward? Have we presented all of the documentation to the stage gate team, and have they reviewed it in detail and understood every aspect of the documentation that they're looking at, such that we can get the green light? Now, at this stage, going from prototype to tooling, I think moving forward with an amber light is at risk. It really is at risk. We're really looking for the green light before we go from prototype to tooling, simply because of the high risk in dollar value if there's any issues going wrong. So it's really important to you have that look forward, a look back sort of aspect to the process itself. So that was my 2 case studies, and I hope that was somewhat enlightening. But so yeah, I remember them very vividly.
Yeah, really good to get real on the ground examples that we can sort of think about. I would invite the listeners to think about their own processes at the moment. If you're developing and getting a product made, is this happening in your project, or are we kind of following the more blended approach, which of course has its drawbacks as you've outlined, right?
Yes.
So I think definitely good to think about that and think about, okay, fine, actually we've not been following this phase gate or traffic light system, if you like, but can we actually implement it? I think that if that's something that you're not using at the moment, maybe you're now thinking that you should be. And yeah, I would agree. But good to go through that. And this really is kind of from the factory floor. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we do and recommend over there when we work with our customers at Agillion. So I love to get these insights, really important. Paul, I think next time we speak, we will be diving a bit deeper into why plastic injection mold tooling is so complex when you're going through the process to get it fabricated as well. And I know this is something that you're deep into for us at our fabrication workshop as well.
Yes, yeah, I'd love to go through that. And that's a really, really important phase or stage within the MPI process. And that is well worth just breaking that into a separate topic that we can talk about. I look forward to that one.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably pencil that one in for September, but that's coming pretty soon because we're getting towards the end of August now. So yeah, we'll have you back on soon. And to all of the listeners, thanks for joining us today. Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.